Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, it looks like there's some new drama that's about to brew up in the Wuthering Waves community because apparently IWTL Gaming has calculated all teams for your tier list. And I'm gonna be honest over here, I've pre-watched some of the sheets, some of the details, some of the compositions, some of the rankings, and boy, oh boy, it's a little bit loaded. And so what I wanted to do was actually go ahead, take a look at this video, and then we'll probably do some follow-ups where we take a look at the actual sheet itself to, well, preview how these rankings are looking like. Because I'll leave it up. I'll leave it up to IWTL to explain some of the stuff for us. Let's give it a bit of a look.
Hello and welcome to my channel, IWTL Gaming. It's been a while since we've done a Wuthering Waves tier list, so in today's video, we're finally going to revisit this topic, and this time, I've come armed to the teeth with math. So what is this video going to be based on?
There's a lot of numbers in here.
It is going to be based on a bunch of team calculations that, you know, I went to the boys and I was like, hey, let's make some team calcs for every single featured 5-star characters in Wuthering Waves. So huge shout out to and thanks to Catalyst Online, who did most of these calcs, as well as most of the calcs in most of my videos, as well as to the people that help him, Low Priority, Sweat Drops, and Pride Win.
So I actually have a direct line with Sweat over here. He's given me his perspective on some of the numbers and some of the calculations and why teams are in certain places. So don't worry, we will be able to speak on his behalf for a good chunk because some of these numbers will probably piss you off. I'm just letting you know.
Now, let's talk a bit about this tier list. As I mentioned, this tier list is focused on 5-star featured resonators. So this is, it's not really going to take into consideration 4-star characters because people tend to get those, for free and stuff. And also, we're not going to be focusing on, for example, the standard banner 5-star characters either. This list is more so going to be focused on which character should you consider pulling for based on, what math that we can base it off of. Summer might be winding down, but Snowbreak can...
All right, the Gooner ad placement is a little. I don't want to get potentially demonetized over here, so we'll skip that one for now. But yeah, a W sponsor.
During today's video. Now, the next thing is that these calculations, we're going to include their ideal team as well as a more free-to-play friendly team. For example, looking at Carlotta here, we've got some calcs for her with Judge and Shorekeeper, as well as a 2-cost calc with, for example, Tauchi and Verena instead. And the reality is, with HP values just going up and up in Tower of Adversity, as well as needing 3 fully geared to the teeth endgame teams effectively, as well as kind of like a 4th team to clear out some of the junk, Tower is, not the same walk in the park as it used to be, and we do actually need to consider team DPS a bit more than we used to.
I think the main thing with the tower right now is that, in my personal opinion, the actual DPS requirements aren't significantly, to the point where they're, absurdly higher. It's just more so the fact that there are a lot of enemies that are actually extremely diseased in this current TOA reset. There's a lot of enemies that people might have a lot of struggle with in terms of, damaging them. But there are some movesets that you can figure out, like the Light Crusher, the Ikes, all of that. But there are other movesets where you literally can't do anything. Well, let's just be honest here. I've already got my list of monsters that I think are absolutely some of the worst things ever. I'll just show them. I'll just show them to you guys. Let me talk a little bit about Hazard Floors 3 and 4 and why it feels like HP can be really crazy. It's because of the Rage Against the Statue boss. This guy can essentially, at random, summon a shield, right? They summon a shield. It gets a tiny little HP bar on the hand, and that just absorbs all the damage that they're taking. A good chunk of it. And the end result is that it feels like its HP can sometimes get close to doubling with how durable its shield is. And sometimes it just doesn't use it. Sometimes it does use it. And on the times where both of them put up their shield, brother, it can make it seem like it has double the HP that it actually should. And you don't get to decide whether or not it puts up a shield. It's extremely random. Second, the Dragon of Dirge is a boss that you can figure out with, you know, sometimes it'll use its charge and stuff. If you're too far away, you can control distance and actually position for this thing. The Lampilumen Myriad just decides randomly when it wants to teleport to random fucking spots on the map. So it's just an absolute disaster fighting against this thing with certain enemies or certain characters on the roster. I would say those are the ones that are like the biggest issues. Because what the Lampilumen does is it basically becomes unhittable. And when you can't hit something and you have like timers going down across your kit or your liberation or something, then you're not generating energy either. So it becomes a damage issue and then an ER issue as well. So that's just my sort of takeaway on the whole like tower thing. Yes, floors 3 and 4 have more HP, but there are some built-in mechanics on the mobs that make it seem like it has even more HP than it actually does in practical gameplay. That's my additional disclaimer on top of it over there.
I figured this was a pretty decent time to give a bit of advice and guidance for this.
Oh, wait, let me go ban somebody from YouTube chat. Go back to the video, Unk. Get off my channel, bro.
Consider team DPS a bit more than we used to. So I figured this was a pretty decent time to give a bit of advice and guidance for this purpose. Now, as mentioned, these are, of course, team calcs, and, you know, I will be basing, I guess, their ranking based on the character's best team. So sometimes you have to take that into consideration. Well, maybe these characters are a bit better as a standalone character, which we will talk a bit about as well. And we are going to be assuming slightly above average player skill. I'd say the average player, if you include like the medium player for this game, I mean, they probably don't even watch guide videos on, you know, Wuthering Waves to even learn proper rotations. So we are assuming a player that, you know, is able to do proper rotations, but isn't really that comfortable or doesn't really have the time to grind perfect quick swap rotations and min-max everything. Look, they've got a job, they've got a girlfriend, maybe a kid. Okay, let me know if you guys have a girlfriend. And they've got...
He sure knows his target audience.
Stuff to do, so, you know, they can't just be spending all their time optimizing a rotation. So we got to take that into consideration when we make recommendations for people.
I always feel like this whole point about player skill is always the most... It is, without a doubt, the most tricky part about all of these comparisons, about all these tier lists, because what these guys have to do, and don't worry, I've gotten word from the actual makers of the calculations themselves, they've got to actually calculate in room for error in the rotations, right? Like, where are like the common pitfalls that players are going to have executing these specific moves in this specific order, and then like actually account for that and like extend rotations, lower DPS, certain things along those lines, right? And that bleeds into the actual numbers, right? Because there are optimal ways to do things. And if you were to calculate things always at the optimal level of performance, that takes out a lot of like the actual factors of, oh, are you going to execute three frame perfect quick swaps in a row to make sure that this resource is at this exact level exactly when you need it to at this point in the rotation? Probably not, unless you're literally playing the game like MLG. You know, you're playing the game like a job. And I like that these disclaimers are so upfront over here. But I will be honest. Yeah, the entire first part, like, we haven't even gotten into the numbers yet. We're 4 minutes in and it's all disclaimers.
There are a few parameters for this list. One is that this is going to be based on Sequence 0, Refinement 1 signature weapons for the DPS characters.
I like that. That's a good ranking.
I decided to normalize that aspect of it because otherwise, you know, there's just way too much variations, and this is a starting point. Perhaps as time goes on, we can adjust the list, and if you guys find this list helpful or interesting in terms of the calcs and stuff, let us know, and, you know, we might be motivated to make more of them.
I have one suggestion for the list over here, right? So what they do is they list out the DPS of the teams. They also list out the total damage. Please put in the rotation time. Right? That's the one thing that's missing over here. Because to get the DPS of a team, you need to take the total damage and then divide it by the number of seconds in the rotation. And one thing that's not clear in any of these calculations is how long these rotations actually take. It's, you know, it's like seeing a bunch of different parts of an equation, but then not like one of the variables. And because you don't have them, you can't calculate everything else.
The other caveat is that Shorekeeper and Verena, when they are on these teams, they're simply using the variation catalyst, and the cost is based on how many featured 5 stars are on their team. For example, if you have Augusta with her signature weapon, that costs 2 worth 5-star featured worth of pulls roughly. And of course, there are a few more disclaimers worth going through. This is not going to be focused on, for example, the utility that characters bring to gameplay modes like Whimpering Wastes. I might mention it here and there, but overall that's not the focus of this. This is more focused on just team DPS output.
I think a lot of people don't recognize that there are many DPSs in this game that trade a decent amount of their damage for some built-in quality of life in their kit. And some of the examples, right, are, well, let's just be honest here. Gian arguably has the most consistent grouping in the game. I don't know any character that can just group for a whole 10 seconds. Similarly, Zhang Liao has 3 built-in time stops in his kit. There's really not any other character in the game that can chain together 3 literal CCs in a row like that on enemies as a main DPS, right? There are sub-DPS characters or supports that have some of those capabilities, but it's not really a situation where, you know, it's like a one-size-fits-all situation.
Then, needless to say, this is not a perfect or even, you know, a great comparison between teams. Now, as for some disclaimers, these team calcs are not intended as an end-all be-all comparison, but simply one reference for team damage. Different teams excel in different situations. Just because one team is better than another team based on these calcs does not mean that that team is always or actually better than whatever teams they ranked higher than. There are certainly mistakes in the calcs and countless ways to optimize, but we did our best to provide some sort of basis of comparison. Please take everything with a giant
So you remember how I said this was going to cause drama? It seems like they also thought that as well. It seems like I win to lose, and the people making these sheets also thought that, because it's been 6 fucking minutes and we haven't covered a single goddamn fucking team yet.
Of salt and use your own best judgment. Now, with all that yapping out of the way, we are going to stop with the cream of the crop, the top dogs in terms of team DPS output, and we actually have the top team as the 100% DPS baseline for this chart. And yeah, we're gonna hop on over to my goofy colorful charts and we can see here that the Cartethia, Chacona, as well as Rover Arrow team here ranks supreme in terms of sheet team DPS, and they are just a bit higher than, for example, Augusta's team with Yuno as well as Shorekeeper. But this is going to be the top 10% teams where, you know, these characters are between 90% and 100% of the best team's damage in the game.
I do like the notes that they have for this, though. I hope he goes over them, because there's a lot of, let's just say there are some complications to running this team. And this is where the whole average time it takes to do a rotation really comes in handy for, you know, you see the DPS over here, you see the total damage. Part of it is, well, how long is this stuff taking?
What's interesting about the Cartethia team is that it is also a bit lower in cost. However, you do have to use Arrow Rover, which I gotta be honest, I do not like using Arrow Rover.
That's the main thing. I think a lot of people are functionally pretty okay with this team doing the most damage in the game because no one likes using this character. It genuinely feels like Arrow Rover is like the cost of using this team, and that cost is so high, I never play this team. I literally, you can look at all gameplay I ever do, I literally never use Cartethia, and I never use Arrow Rover. And the reason for that is very simple. I despise using this character so much. I've had stages where the enemy is too aggressive at the start of the battle, and it's actually just not possible to do Arrow Rover starting rotation. It's like literally, I remember we're trying to record against certain TOA floors, and this guy just gets knocked out of the air immediately. And there's just like nothing you can do, because if you dodge in the air, then you just plunge. And it's like you still have to jump back up into the air anyways. It's just so painful trying to get this guy to do anything at all. And yes, their weapon is really good, but they're a walking weapon buff, bro. That's like it. If you could use Arrow Rover's weapon buff on any other character, you would.
The character has issues, to say the
Just
least.
look at that shit. Hey, that's like perfect. I don't know if that was like, I don't know if he was playing himself.
To be honest, I do not like using Arrow Rover. The character has issues.
Look at that. Look at that. They missed the Forte attack, just like at like a regular start of the TOA stage.
Has issues, to say the least. At least I feel like they have issues. But you know, as you can see, this team is going to be the baseline, and I don't think people are going to be surprised that these are the two top teams, Cartethia as well as Chacona. Being obviously incredible characters with each other. And this is also important to note, is that we are, in this case, putting these characters here in this tier based on their best team. So for example, would Chacona be a character you would pull without Cartethia or some of her other good teams? Honestly, probably not. But, you know, with that in mind, we are taking a look at their best teams in this case.
I think one thing to note is that Chacona is the best teammate on a lot of teams. That's something to keep in mind. Chacona is, without a doubt, the best teammate on a lot of the teams that are going to be on this list.
And next we have Augusta, Yuno, and Shorekeeper. No one's surprised to see, I think, the three of them up here. Augusta recently released DPS character, one of the best in the game, and she also feels great to use. We have Yuno as well, one of my personal favorite characters, I would say. I think she's absolutely fantastic, and she's also a jack of all trades, providing a ton of utility for the team. And finally, we have Shorekeeper, who is, you're going to see her a lot on this list.
One thing to keep in mind is that Augusta actually is one of the most interruptible teams in the game. She has a very big tendency to get her attacks completely stuffed. She has multiple liberation casts. Some of them can just be straight up canceled if you're staggered during the starting animations. So there's a little bit of clunk in that trunk when it comes to doing this lineup. And I think that alone is kind of like one of the barriers that's there. Rather than, you know, the Rover Arrow situation for the Cartithia team, it's kind of like the Augusta situation for the Augusta team. If you played Augusta before, you probably know what I'm talking about with this one.
But at the very least, in terms of her very top team, she's also part of one of the best teams in the game with Augusta as well as Yuno. Next, we've got the 80 to 90%er teams, and there are three teams that fall into this category. First, we have Frolova, Cantarella, as well as Rocha, and this team will absolutely murder Whimpering Waste.
It is the best Whimpering Waste team in the game. And I hope he mentions that this team has found a resurgence in Tower of Adversity.
But in terms of even for just tower viability and just like, you know, DPS checks and how much damage they can output in terms of their overall DPS, this team is going to be one of the better ones, although Rocha is definitely one of the more interchangeable characters on this list.
Yeah, you can replace her with the Danjin. So I want to talk about some of the specifics when it comes to the new TOA floors and why Frolova is just inherently more valuable now than she was before. Typically in the TOA, floors 1 and 2 are the hardest. These would take you on average about a minute to clear. For these floors, on the other hand, there's more waves of enemies. You're taking around 2 minutes, if not around 2 minutes and 15 seconds sometimes to get it clear. And that means that Frolova, because of her after sound stacking mechanic, she actually has way more value in these later stages, because one thing that she does, right, is gain a shit ton of crit damage and then also gain a shit ton of additional multiplier on her nuke as the fight duration gets longer and longer. So ironically enough, the lower investment your Frolova is, like, the more she benefits from, like, these longer bits of content, because, well, she'll have more opportunities to stack all of this stuff up. So that's kind of like what's going on over here. So the longer the fight is, like how in Weewa, you're forced to do a full 2-minute fight. With the new TOA floors, with them having more enemies, you having an additional 30 seconds to get a 3-star clear, well, the longer it is, the better it is for her.
Do keep in mind, though, that we are talking about a 6-cost team, which definitely makes this, of course, you know, a bigger investment. And you may have noticed that in this Augusta, you know, Shorekeeper team, that Shorekeeper only counts as 1 cost here. And this is, you know, in this case, we have Shorekeeper and Verena using variation, so that's why they are only at 1 cost. when typically, obviously if they had their signatures or if Shorekeeper had her signature, she'd be a 2-cost character in this case.
Yeah.
But the next couple teams actually really surprised me, one of them being my man, Gion. And
you heard that right, ladies and gentlemen. According to this list and with all of its disclaimers factored in, Gion is the 4th best team in the game. Get ready to cope and seethe, ladies and gentlemen. It's time to cope and seethe.
of course, he is definitely getting a bit wheelchaired here by Yuno as well as Chikona.
So this is why the definition of wheelchairing is incorrect in my opinion. So the way that this team works is that Gion and Yuno are both Arrow. Right? They're both Arrow characters. And the thing is that Chikona, like I mentioned before, she's one of the best units in the game currently in terms of pull value because she has so much ability with her signature once again to reduce arrow resistance on the enemy. And then additionally, right, she's able to buff arrow damage just at a baseline with her solo concert by 24%. So the end result is that Chikona is a unit that can fully realize her 24% arrow damage bonus and her arrow resistance reduction. Let me talk a little bit about how this is so much more different than what's going on the arrow erosion team, right? When you're running like a Kartithia and a Chikona and an arrow rover, one thing is very, very, very certain. Your arrow rover is dealing literally no damage on the fucking team. All your arrow rover is doing is providing their damage amp and pretty much nothing else and some occasional healing, right? Your 10% arrow res reduction and your 24% arrow damage bonus from here functionally is doing almost nothing for arrow rover because they're not dealing any damage in the first place. While if you're running a comp with like a Yuno, right, alongside a Gion, these are two characters that are fully benefiting from all of those different effects at the same time. And guess what? But the thing is, there's a trade-off in this team. Because all of your arrow erosion stacks, right? Your 20 stacks are literally not doing anything. While, when you're running the Kartithia team, Kartithia is scraping erosion stacks off the top, detonating them, and then constantly having it reapplied with Chikona being off field. That's kind of like the dynamic that's working in this team, right? Because you can clearly see, trigger one instance of erosion damage and reduce the stacks. Chikona is constantly, right, refueling them. While when she's in the Gion or Yuno team, well, her arrow erosion is just capping out at 3 and then not really doing anything. But you're using her other buffs way better. So, the whole term wheelchairing to me isn't what I would use. This is more so just a team that heavily synergizes with each other. They all are just working alongside each other to buff everybody, spread the use cases of these buffs way further. This is more so like a mono fusion team, right? As opposed to other teams in the game. It's like a mono arrow team, while this is the erosion team.
But it is great to see him as one of the older characters having a new incredible team. And personally, out of the teams I use with Yuno, this is one of my personal favorites.
This is also my favorite Yuno and Chikona team. I will run this 10 out of 10. I will run this every time over the Kartithia Chikona Arrow Rover team. Because when I play this, I don't need to play Arrow Rover.
I have a strong bias towards him because one nice thing I really, really like about Gion is that no matter how rusty I am at this game, like, oh, I forgot how Frolova Cantarella's rotation works. Oh, I can just throw in Gion. I remember him is super, super simple, super easy. So yeah, that is one benefit of Gion, is that he is just such an easy character to pick up and play. And for him to be...
And again, the dodge cancels. This is good. This is relatively good Gion gameplay over here too.
Currently in one of the top 4 teams here is absolutely fantastic. Him being such an old character as well. But the issue is in terms of, like, for example, pull value, that's when, you don't really pull him in today's day and age when you've got characters like main DPS here that is doing.
I think there's still a decent case for pull value. I'm going to be honest. And the pull value is basically going to be if you don't like playing Arrow Rover or Kartithia, because this team will clear all the content in the game. And this is another thing, right? This Gion, Kachona team is so much better in Whimpering Waves than this team. It's actually almost unethical. It is genuinely almost unethical how much better this team is in Weewa compared to this team. And this team still bulldozes the TOA. And that's going to be my take. You go in, you don't have any specific buffs for like an Arrow Erosion team. You take either of these into Weewa, you're going to have a way better experience with one of them compared to the other. And you already know which one's going to give you a better experience.
Doing nearly as well at a lower cost as well with, for example, Rover Arrow. So just keep all that stuff in mind when I mention this stuff. And
there's also a heavy drawback for the main DPS team. The AoE on it is fucking dog shit. It has, like, literally, you will be able to actually see how bad this team performs in some content right now. For example, like I just mentioned before, 2 of these guys spawn. And Yuno's AoE can be, like, so picky and so bad that even with these guys spawning next to each other, you'll only damage one of them. I could just show you an example of it firsthand, actually. And this is where I would say a lot of people do seem to be overestimating Yuno significantly. I know we're using it in the Gion team, but you'll be able to see what I'm talking about here. Right? This is exactly what I'm talking about here. She cannot hit both of them. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of annoying to deal with. Even in the tower. Imagine that in Whimpering Wastes. And that is the point that I'm trying to make over here. Yes, she has main DPS potential, but her AoE coverage can be so fucking bad that it's, again, it's like jumping through hoops. It's like having Arrow Rover as your support. There are some barriers that end up happening across the gameplay that, again, a lot of people, they're not going to factor in to the actual, into like the actual, they'll just look at the numbers and not factor in that side of the equation.
You can see, obviously, like, this does not mean this is a blessing to go pull Gion. No, it's not. But if you do have him, you have some hope for him. Now, let's move on to the next tier, which is the 70 to 80% gang, Carlotta, Judge, and Shorekeeper in this tier. And still, this team still feels absolutely fantastic to use. They tend to be able to handle whatever you need them to, whatever you need them to handle for the most part, except for maybe some of the most difficult things in the center tower.
I think it's perfectly fine in the center tower. I'm gonna disagree with this take over here. I think that this team absolutely blows out the back of everything in the game still. I even took this team into Whimpering Waste and just easy got like a 2.5k score, right? Where AoE is supposed to be Carlotta's worst content. Yeah, I think he's understating this team a little bit. It still completely bulldozes all the content in the game. That isn't Glacio immune.
Struggle a bit, but they can definitely handle the side tower stuff for sure. And up next, I'm a bit surprised to see her, I guess, down technically this low, but we've got Zani.
Oh, another note from Sweat Drops, who is who's somebody that collaborated on this list. One thing he told me was that the Carlotta and Jeja team that's being listed over here has an extraordinarily long rotation. And the reason why Carlotta is being specifically singled out for having a longer rotation is the fact that Carlotta kind of is one of the most automatic teams in the game. There's almost no way to mess up her rotation if you know what buttons to press, because she's got like iframes out the wazoo, incredible gap closing, built-in dodges in her kit, built-in invulnerability on her plunge attacks and stuff like that. So, like, the end result is that if you practice just a teeny bit with Carlotta, you can get extremely close to, like, frame-perfect sheet-level rotations, right? And from what we're seeing on here in these DPS lineups, and that's why I said rotation time would be helpful, you're not seeing, like, the longer amount of time it's taking to do the Carlotta rotation in this sheet, when it's actually potentially more realistic for it to be shorter. because of how easy this team is to play. So that's my disclaimer for that one. Now let's move on to the, the Zani situation over here.
Yuno and Phoebe here. And Zani and Phoebe, you know, when they were released, I would say they felt like the next kind of level of DPS. Although really on paper, it looks like Carlotta here was actually kept up. So not as much power creep as expected.
This is a similar sort of argument for the Carlotta team, right? You are fully capable of using Zani Phoebe teams to a much higher degree, but then the amount of swap cancels, frame perfect shit you need to do to actually make that occur is no one's actually been able to replicate it from the human perspective. It's just impossible to get these numbers that a lot of individuals have been sheeting out as 15, 25% power creep. And the end result is that a lot of players actually got baited into pulling Zani and Phoebe, thinking that it was this team that literally was doing 25% more damage than everybody else. And then those same exact players literally regret the purchase. They can't clear with her in like floor 4 of the hazard zone. They're getting absolutely ass swiped by the Dragon of Dirge and the Lampy Lumen Myriad because the buffs don't work that well for Zani. And so people are just like not able to reach even close to that full potential of what was heavily advertised to them, right? As 15, 25% power creep. And it's led to a lot of people with a Zani and Phoebe that are currently collecting dust. That's the reality of the situation. And unfortunately, right, it is what it is, but it's just in the hands of most players, this team is really not doing that well. And the number of people that you see struggling on this floor with this team over here is a little bit... I've seen so many people not able to clear with this team. A lot of people.
But in this case, we are assuming Yuno with Zani team. However, you of course don't need Yuno. And in fact, if you just use Spectre Rover or something, you are at just about roughly the same amount of performance. So that is good to see. Zani still pretty powerful main DPS character. And we've actually here, we're seeing one of our first low cost teams with Augusta, Mortefi, and Shorekeeper only costing 3. In this case, Augusta, S-tier R1, Shorekeeper costing 1 as well. So definitely one of the highest performing low-cost teams on this list.
And think about it this way. Mortefi, Augusta, Shorekeeper is one of those teams where you can't really fuck up the gameplay that much. The only thing that can occur during a Mortefi, Shorekeeper, Augusta rotation that messes you up is you getting interrupted during an attack. That is the skill barrier in that team. Did you attack in the middle of an enemy's attack and get your Augusta's rotation stuffed? And if that doesn't occur, congratulations, you've passed the skill check.
We've got the Fusion crew with Brant, Lupa, and Chongli.
And this is where I'm going to be like, okay, I'm not really sure what's going on over here.
And Chongli, again, is one of those characters who kind of like Jian, who's like, super ancient. We've got Grandpa and Grandma here trying to make their way into the meta. But fortunately, that is one nice thing about Wuthering Waves and the way they release characters, is that they do release characters that elevate older characters. Like, for example, Lupa was a great pull if you had Chongli.
So this is why I said having the time is really important, because I'm not sure, because this is basically the main thing, right? If you look at the damage of this team, it's literally the 4th, according to the calcs, right? It's the 4th best damage out of everything on the roster, hypothetically, right? It's the 4th best damage team. But it's way below all of the other teams with a similar number, which would lead you to believe they're taking a really fucking long time to rotate with this team. That rotation is 28.2 seconds. I mean, fuck it. We can just, test it out firsthand to see how long it would take over here. 28.42 seconds? This is the thing. I find this team to be one of the easiest ones to pilot if you're going at it just from, an outro skill point of view. This is, and believe me, I will tell you what I'm doing. It's very simple. Land that ability. Then I'm literally just spamming the left mouse button over here, right? I'm pressing left mouse button again, and then I use this attack. Boom. And then I'm going to outro skill into, I guess, thin air. That was really awkward. And then... Okay, that's actually going to mess up my rotation. I'm spamming basic. The only problem with that was Brant whiffed his intro. That was it. But just look at this. I'm spamming basic. I use my skill when it's up. And I'm going to intro skill in, liberation, and then I'm going to hold down my left mouse button. And then I'm going to press this. Then I'm going to press Q. Then I'm going to intro skill in, right? And then I'm going to spam the attack button. Skill, hit the attack button, skill, hit the attack button, right? And then I'm going to use this, liberation, then heavy attack, and then echo, and that's it, right? Like, that is the team's rotation when I'm playing it, right? Super easy. And that's the thing, right? I don't know if those are the attacks that they're using. I don't know if that's the rotation that they're using. We don't actually know if that's the one that's being shared across all the different teams. That's the one that I use. And believe me when I say this, that one does a shit ton of damage. That one does a shit ton of damage. And I've compared, like, clear times and stuff like that, running all of these teams, like, on my lonesome, right? It just kind of ends up at, like, similar, if not faster, clear times than other teams. That could be due to like echo investment and stuff like that, right? But yeah, that's why I would love to see how long these rotations are taking and what rotations they're actually doing as well.
Characters who kind of like Jian, who's like, you know, super ancient. We've got Grandpa and Grandma here trying to make their way into the meta. But fortunately, that is one nice thing about Wuthering Waves and the way they release characters, is that they do release characters that elevate older characters. Like, for example, Lupa was a great pull if you had Chong-Li, so is Brant as well. And personally though, I have a feeling that if they release a new fusion DPS character, the first character that's going to go is Chong-Li. But yeah, we'll just... it's good to still see her being, you know, viable in the 70 to 80% gang.
Yeah, I don't know. That's, again, the rotation time to me is really something that's important, and the rotation that they're doing, because I kind of want to like try it. Like, I kind of want to like try it against like this thing. Did someone say it was 28 seconds? 28.2? I just want to even, like, see if that's, like, even humanely possible. I mean, it's getting close to that, right? But, I mean, I was able to get it in, like, 30. But are they doing the same exact attacks that I am? I think that's the question. Are they doing the same attacks that I am currently? Because, yeah, that's what it's looking like in the middle tower into absolutely no resistance. Right, like no resistance, no bonuses. That's what it's looking like in there. Again, I would just like to see what the rotations actually are to be getting those timings, because I would say I played it in the most, like, casual, but, like, invested casual way possible.
And next we've got a Jian team without, you know, a bit lower cost with Shorekeeper instead of, for example, a Chacona up here. And this team doesn't really add anyone to this tier, but you can see how, for example, with Jian, you know, Shorekeeper, now this team is not nearly as good as, for example, with Chacona instead. Now, we've had a big
so yeah, Jian's on the list twice.
reveal of a lot of characters in the 60 to 70% of the top meta DPS character gang. And interestingly though, only 2 characters were added to this based on their best teams. So this is the first time that these characters were featured anywhere, you know, in any of these teams. Those 2 characters being Camellia and Jin Shi. But we can see as we start to make less optimal combinations of characters, like for example, Encore here instead of Chong-Li, you can see it drops a few percentage points. But yeah, I mean, that's another point that I wanted to make with Chong-Li, is that you've got free-to-play options like Encore, Chuxia as well.
So one thing, again, that I've been told by some of the people in charge of some of the calculations, or that aided out with the calculations, is that a lot of these characters have much higher DPS openers, much higher DPS in terms of like, that doesn't actually require that much additional inputs to do, but they've taken a much more casual approach with certain units like a Jinsei and with certain units like the Camellia. And so they actually have a tendency to have way higher overall DPS. It's just they're kind of being shown at a very surface level overview right now. And another thing that I kind of need to mention just right off of the bat, I've already covered it in other videos before, is the fact that 1.0 units are without a doubt, in one degree, they're without a doubt completely power crept. And that one is, ladies and gentlemen, Sonata sets. Because it's pretty clear by now, hopefully it is clear, that there's a big difference between a set like Celestial Light, which gives you just 40% spectral damage. There's a big difference between this and something like this, where you gain 30% attack and 20% critical damage on top of the 2-piece bonus. The reality kind of has become 1.x units, their Sonata sets are so much fucking worse than every new unit. It's almost insane how bad they are. Like, you just look at Frolova's over here. She's just out here slanging 20% crit rate and 35% echo skill damage bonus, right? It's just, you look at every new set in comparison. Hey, let's look at Carlotta, right? The oldest new set. She just gets like 70+% skill damage. She just gains like 70+% skill and glacial damage combined. And it's like, yes, when every other character is using a set that has 40%, there's going to be a difference in the overall numbers. And so I would dare say, and this is something that I've asked for specifically, it would be really interesting to see what the DPS of these 2.x units, these Augustas, these Frolovas, these Carlottas, if they were on 1.x sets instead. What does Cartithia look like on Sierra Gale? What does Augusta look like on Void Thunder? What does Frolova look like on Havoc Eclipse? Carlotta on the Glacial set nobody fucking uses, right? Zani on Celestial Light. And the thing is, probably not nearly as good as the numbers that you're seeing right now. I think people have calculated it on average. It's about a 7 to 9k DPS decrease. Just so you know, it's a 7 to 9k DPS decrease using a 1.x set on the 2.x units. So yeah, you got the whole Uno team over here, probably drops down to 50-something K. Augusta's team probably drops down to like high 60s. Frolova's team probably jumps all the way down to 50-something, right? That's what y'all gotta keep in mind when you're looking at the placement of some of these older units. Part of it, potentially, could be from outdated kit design, but another part of it, right, is likely due to the fact that they're using some dog shit Sonata sets compared to all the new units.
That make Chong-Li kind of a low pull value for your account. Unless you got her swimsuit, then she's a great pull value. Can you buy her swimsuit without buying her? I actually have no idea, but if that's something you want, then yeah, you could go for it. But anyway, we can see here that as we get into typically lower cost teams, although a couple of them are a bit higher cost, like for example, Camellia's cost here, we've got a 5 cost team, pretty low performing, all things considered. And I gotta be honest, I personally don't like using Camellia. Every time I use her, I don't know, just something about it feels off. Regardless, yeah, we can.
You all know why he doesn't like using Camellia? Because motherfucker's still using Blossom. For some reason, I don't know why. Why is everyone still using Blossom mode in single target? Guys, she does more damage in the single target white-haired form. Her dodge counters, guys, please, a PSA, please just use her regular non-Blossom. This is Blossom form. Look at the dodge counter damage. 220% in the AoE form. In the single target form, it's 300%. So if you're against a single target boss like this, and you're constantly dodging and using dodge counters, guys, use the white-haired form, please. It literally does more damage. You can even see on the spin too. 22 times 19, 24.7 times 20. Please, guys, I'm begging you. I'm begging you, please just use the white-haired form. You'll be like, wow, this actually changes everything.
Using Camellia every time I use her, I don't know, just something about it feels off. Regardless, yeah, we can start to see
something about it feels off. I figured out what feels off. We figured out what feels off.
That older characters, Camellia, I guess Camellia's kind of old at this point, as well as Jinshi, they're starting to fall down here in this list area. But we have not made it to the rock bottom yet. Let's go ahead and reveal the final characters on this list. And bam, we've got the less than 60% gang, and there are only 2 characters that unfortunately fall into this category. Those characters being Shang Li Yao as well as Yin Lin.
So like I said, ladies and gentlemen, this is literally the worst team in the game. I have said this so many times, that this Zhang Liao Yinlin team is literally the worst one in the game.
Now, perhaps if you put Yinlin on a team where she can get carried a bit more, this might be, you know, a bit more, maybe she might be able to crawl up a tier or something. And
you can see over here, it literally deals, and I've said this so many times, it literally deals less damage than Gian Mortefi. It literally deals less damage than Gian fucking Mortefi, bro. Oh, and guess what, guys? Oh, and this is the other one that I love. Remember when I said Gian Mortefi is stronger than Kartithia Sanhua? And everyone started schizoing out and said that I was wrong? That Gian Mortefi is stronger than Kartithia Sanhua? Just eat my ass, you idiots. I have told you so many times. I have told you so many times.
This is also
2 costs versus 3 costs. If you're out here and you're gonna compare Shorekeeper as a cost, if you're genuinely calling Shorekeeper even a significant cost at this point, let's just be real, guys. You're missing the point entirely.
Also something that, you know, we discussed was, for example, you can't just slap on Originite Type 4 onto Shang Li Yao and then throw him on a team with like Kartethia, Chikona, or Augusta, you know, and call it a day. So we
You can, however, play Zhang Liao in dual DPS and he will fuck up content.
decided to avoid, you know, like shenanigans like that. So really we're sticking with kind of their actual teams, right? Needless to say, you know, Shang Li Yao is also a character that greatly benefits from higher skill expression as well. And same with Yin Lin. So I do think there is that to keep in mind, that this does not factor in, for example, super sweaty quick swapping, where, you know, players can definitely get more value out of these characters, as well as many of the other characters above. But definitely these 2 for sure can appreciate it. So yeah, a bit sad to see them down this low, you know.
It's because Yinlin's a piece of dog shit. That's really what it is. It's because Yinlin is a fucking terrible character. There is just really no circumstance where any unit in the game should be dealing this little damage. Like, literally her liberation just deals, like, almost, like, hardly, it's like 800% damage on her liberation, right? This thing's over here. It's got a 125 resonance cost. Okay, it's a little bit low, right? Whatever. Look at Chikona's, bro. It's the same cost. It just deals more damage. It just deals more damage. And, like, has even, like, an additional, like, 120% in the DOT. You just look at her kit, right? And you're like, okay. You could say the other sub DPSs power crep Yinlin, or you could just say the truth of the matter. Yinlin released underpowered as fuck. Her gameplay was probably completely unsatisfying because the character was literally dealing no damage at all. And so every sub DPS that released afterwards just deals a more regular level of damage and just feels way better to play. But the end result is that Yinlin, as the first limited sub DPS, has just fallen behind the curve because everyone else just deals so much more damage than her. It's actually ridiculous. Every other DPS just deals, or every other sub DPS just deals so much more than her.
Unfortunately, that's just the way team calcs go. They don't really care about anything besides how well do they sheet and how well do they theorycraft in this case. So yeah, this is the list for example, the best S0R1 teams for each individual character and how they rank in terms of just how they compare to the best team in the game. And I've got one more bonus list for you guys, and that is which characters have the best 2 cost only teams. And the reason why I actually think this tier list is a bit helpful is because of how we need 3 to 4 fully built teams for Tower of
Okay, so these are like the best budget teams. Okay, let's take a look at these.
now. So yeah, you may want to consider, which characters can kind of carry their own weight really, really well.
Okay.
And actually, if we set the new baseline really quick over to this right here, now we can actually see a new ranking system where the best 2 cost only team at the moment, based on, the calcs that we have so far.
Okay, these teams make a decent amount of sense to me.
Is Frolova, Rover Havoc, and Don Jin. So Frolova bringing her gang of, free-to-play friendly Havoc characters. And we can see here that this team actually does reasonably well. And for a 2-cost team, in comparison to, for example, on these other top tiers, we've got the 90 to 100% gang. We've got, unsurprisingly, Frolova, Augusta, being the top dogs in terms of this.
I would say these are relatively fair looking analyses. You can tell that there's like somebody a little bit broken being used for teams 3 and 4 because once again, Arrow Rover's weapon passive of like 26% amp is like ridiculous, right?
And we've got Cartethia as well, who I do think is worth mentioning. A lot of people say, like, I do think personally I could round.
Okay, so this is where I find the calculations to be a little bit interesting, right? I think we could take a look at it ourselves. So one thing that we took a look at over here, right, was Gian compared to Gian Mortefi Shorekeeper, right, at a nice little 48. And then you see Gian Mortefi Verena at 41. I'm not gonna lie, I personally am a little bit curious as to how replacing Verena with Shorekeeper is like a 7k damage difference. I'm gonna be honest, like a 7k DPS difference from putting in Shorekeeper over Verena is a little bit ambitious to me. I personally wouldn't view it as like, I mean, maybe this is like literally exactly the case, right? But that's kind of like where we are right now, right? That's a little bit wild in my opinion. So yeah, that's kind of a lot.
Round up and move her up here. You know what? I'm going to do that. I'm going to take the liberties of rounding up.
And this is the thing, right? You'll never know where that increase is coming from because one thing about cheating that, of course, has been talked about a lot when it comes to cheating is that you have a consistent level of stats, right? That you're putting into the calculation, a consistent level of investment that you're putting in for all of these units, and then having the different stat buffs, all of that on top of it, right? And so the end result is that unless I know what is being put into this formula, you can't be entirely sure about, the end result of the calculations. Because you don't see what's going inside. You don't know what the base stats are, right? What if these are all teams with like 50% crit rate and 250% critical damage? And so when you put in Shorekeeper, right? When you put in Shorekeeper, she actually has way more value. Alternatively, right? If you were to put in base stats of 90% crit rate, then Shorekeeper's value suddenly falls off of a cliff, right? But you don't know what the stats of the character are in advance, and that's why I'm saying I don't know the whole story unless I know what the stats actually are on what's being input into these calculations.
To move her up, actually, no. This list is purely based on calc, so we're not going to do that. But we can definitely see a recency bias here in terms of having a single character be able to carry with Frolova, Augusta, and Cartethia. Although we do suffer quite a bit once we get into the next gang, which is the pretty much 80 to 90% gang. And actually, I'm a bit surprised here. We've got Phoebe.
I would dare say, I do find it interesting that based off the sheeting over here, they're saying Arrow Rover Sanhua Cartithia is better than Camellia Sanhua Verena. Maybe that's right, but I would say in practice, I feel like most people are getting better results with Camellia Sanhua Verena than Cartithia Sanhua Arrow Rover. That's my take, just from personal experience running the teams. One's a lot better than the other. And that's, just another part of the calcs.
And Zani, neck and neck here, with Phoebe outperforming Zani by a little bit in terms of, a theoretical DPS, as well as Zani just, being right next to Phoebe, which is kind of funny to me to see. But yeah. And then we've got the next tier for the low-cost gang, and we've got Gian and Carlotta who, you know, they're in the 70 to 80% range of the best 2-cost only team, which is reasonable, all things considered, although, you know, of course not fantastic. And then we're hitting to the much lower tiers with Brant. If you use Brant as your main DPS character, and, you know, of course, Brant is more not really a main DPS character, so it's actually pretty interesting to see him rank reasonably. Well, yeah, at this point, you know, these are kind of the bottom 3 characters in terms of 2-cost only teams. Brant, Jinshi, and Xiangli Yao. And unfortunately, we don't have, you know, calcs for all these characters in terms of...
Let's just be honest. If you're using any of the teams closer to the bottom, you are basically scraping the bottom of the barrel.
2-cost only teams, so I apologize for that. Perhaps in the future, as we get around to making more and more team calcs, we might be able to add them. But needless to say, obviously, Shorekeeper is not like a low-tier characters. These characters just don't have, you know, exclusive 2-cost only team calcs for them. So yeah, there you go. These are the 2 tier lists based on team calculations. And keep in mind, again, these are just purely theoretical, theory-crafted rotations and teams. They are, of course, by no means 100% accurate in accounting for the average player's skill. And perhaps, you know, maybe you can find some value out of it, whether you're trying to build a low-cost team and deciding, hey, who should I pull for? Or if you're trying to or you're trying to get some of the best teams in the game to clear some of the hardest stuff in the game, well, hey, we've got this list on the side for those characters that really, really excel in the situations if you are looking to invest fully into a character's team.
I mean, overall, I would say I don't think this is a bad list at all, but I do think that there are just a couple of standouts in terms of like the calculations, not necessarily like seeing the rotations. I'm personally of the boat that I feel like the Mono Fusion team is not necessarily getting. Like, the Mono Fusion team, to me, like, even, like, with the coverage in the video, and, of course, the fact that it's, like, closer to the bottom of this list over here, and then, like, in the video, like, the only explanation we get is that, like, Chang Li's, like, old. That, to me, is, like, I really do feel like there was probably a lot more coverage that could have been done over here in regards to this lineup. And, you know, again, I would like to see the rotation, time, all of that. Just to, you know, actually get, like, the full picture of this one, right? Because one thing you could easily say about the Mono Fusion team is that it is one of the higher investment ones in the game. And I'm somebody that in all of my gameplay, playing all these different lineups, trying them out in all these different TOA floors, it's a team that I've seen literally do, like, perform the best compared to a lot of other ones on my roster. And so, yeah, it might just be a personal thing. It might just be because I have incredibly good echoes and stuff like that. But also another part of it is like, wait, I'm not, like, the hell is like going on? The hell is like going on in the back end of this thing? So, yeah, that's basically just it for me. I would just say as a whole, great overall video to, I think, educate a part of the populace. But I do think that there's a lot of disclaimers that need to be done. And, you know, we'll take the opportunity to do a bit of like a deep dive into, well, what does it look like when you actually take that theory and put it into practice? So that might be one of the future videos that we have coming up when it comes to this tier list. Maybe just taking a look at the top teams and then seeing how they actually perform. That'll be that for this one, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, make sure you give a thanks to I Win to Lose. You know, all of that. Give him a like and I mean, he uploads too much like content on other games that I'm not going to watch, so that's why I don't sub to him. But if you do play those games, make sure you do. Let me know what you all thought. Peace.